The Atlantic night was unnaturally quiet. Too quiet for a war zone. No engines, no distant gunfire. Only the slow, heavy breathing of the ocean. But beneath that black sheet of water, something was happening that defied every law of physics and every rule of naval warfare. A German U-boat, U-57, had just taken a direct torpedo hit. The kind of hit that doesn't leave survivors. The kind of blast that splits steel like paper. The kind of impact that ends stories, not begins them. Inside the submarine, chaos screamed. Alarms howled. Red lights flashed. Seawater rushed in, like a living creature trying to swallow the men whole. Crew members were thrown to the floor, blood mixing with flooding water. The captain shouted, "Ballast control, now!" But the system was dead. The submarine was sinking, fast, silent, hopeless. Everyone believed this was it. But then, everything stopped. The pressure, the screams, even the water. U-57 fell into an impossible calm. Hours later, long after every sailor should have drowned, the submarine surfaced on its own, with the entire crew unconscious but alive. That was the night the legend of the Unbroken Keel was born. When rescue teams reached U-57 at dawn, the sight stunned even the most hardened naval officers. The submarine floated calmly near the harbor entrance, as if returning from an ordinary patrol. Yet the damage along the hull suggested a catastrophic torpedo blast, a direct hit that should have torn the keel apart and dragged the entire boat into the abyss. The engineering team climbed aboard expecting to find a miracle, or a nightmare. What they found was both. The inside of the boat looked like the aftermath of a hurricane. Pipes torn from the walls, electrical panels blown open, bunks crushed under debris, and in the middle of this chaos lay the entire crew, unconscious, drenched, bruised, but breathing. Not a single fatality. Even. Stranger, none of the men remembered what happened after the torpedo struck. Their last memory was the violent impact, the lights dying, and then nothing. When they opened the engine room, the investigation entered another realm of impossibility. The main battery unit, which should have been destroyed in the blast, was perfectly functional. Even more bizarre, the ballast tanks showed signs of a controlled emergency blow, something that requires manual override and physical force. Yet every crew member was unconscious at the time the submarine surfaced. The commanding officer of the salvage operation, Captain Lieutenant Eric Brunner, later wrote in his report, "There is no technical explanation. Either the submarine acted on its own, or someone else acted for it." Engineers initially suspected an equipment malfunction, but malfunctions don't activate. Synchronized systems balance the ballast and steer a dying submarine toward port, and certainly not after a torpedo explosion that rendered the controls inoperable. For days, U-57 sat in dry dock under the watch of security teams and naval researchers. They tested every system, inspected every valve, measured every structural fracture. Nothing made sense. The hull was fractured in multiple places, yet pressure readings showed that the submarine had maintained stability during ascent. That alone should have been impossible. Whispers began spreading among sailors at the dockyard. Some called U-57 cursed. Others called it blessed. But all of them agreed on one thing. Submarines don't die and return, and U-57 had just done exactly that. The German Navy wanted answers, but the deeper they dug, the stranger the questions became. Why did the submarine surface at the exact tide cycle where it could be found? Why? Were its navigation rudders aligned perfectly toward home base? Why did the ballast tanks activate with deliberate timing? A submarine with a dead crew should sink. A submarine with a dead control system should stay dead. But U-57 surfaced as if guided by someone or something the crew could not remember. This was only the beginning. The Atlantic had spared the submarine once, but the sea never spares anything twice. And yet U-57 would defy death again. The sight of U-57 returning from the dead shocked the entire dockyard. Sailors gathered along the pier as the silent steel shape drifted toward the harbor. The boat looked wounded but alive, like a giant creature that had crawled out of the ocean after a failed hunt. No one understood what they were seeing. News traveled through the base faster than any official report. Officers whispered that a submarine destroyed in battle had returned on its own. Ordinary sailors spoke of ghosts. Engineers spoke of miracles. Commanders spoke of impossible events that should never reach a war log. Inside the operations building, the atmosphere felt heavy. Every man working there had seen disasters. They had witnessed boats that never came home. They had sent letters to families, knowing those letters meant the end of hope. But this time, something else was happening. U-57 had risen without a living crew member touching a single control. Men who should have drowned were breathing. Systems that should have failed were working. All logic seemed to break under the weight of the event. The first investigation began within an hour. Officers climbed aboard expecting to find the crew, panicking or in a state of shock. Instead, they found an eerie kind of silence. Every man lay, unconscious on the floor. Some were wet, some had bruises. Some looked as if they had been pulled back from the edge of a dark nightmare. Yet all of them were alive. Not one sailor had water in his lungs. Not one showed signs of asphyxiation. It was as if the sea had swallowed them, but then returned them without explanation. The ship doctor checked each man separately. He could not find any reason for them to be unconscious for so long. Their pulse was strong, their breathing normal. He wrote in his notes that the crew looked like men who had slept through a storm. Only this storm had been a torpedo blast that should have killed every one of them. When the captain finally woke, he stared at the ceiling as if he had forgotten where he was. The first officer tried to speak, but his voice broke. They looked at each other in confusion. The investigators asked what had happened after the explosion. The captain answered with a trembling voice. He said he remembered the impact. He remembered shouting orders. He remembered the lights going out. After that, he remembered only darkness. Nothing else. The same answer came from every crew member. A single moment of chaos, then a dark, silent emptiness. The engineers studied the ballast tanks. The reading showed a perfect emergency rise sequence. The timing was accurate to the second. It looked like a trained officer had activated each step with calm precision. But every trained officer was unconscious at the time. The electrical logs showed that the control panel had rebooted itself. But no one had touched the switches. Batteries that should have been flooded were operating as if untouched by seawater. Depth gauges that should have cracked remained steady. Steering controls that were jammed during the blast now rested in a perfect alignment pointing toward home. One officer noted that the compass reading recorded during the ascent lined up with the exact route back to the German coastline. It appeared as though the submarine had chosen its own path home. But submarines do not think. They do not choose. They do not act without hands guiding them. The investigation stretched for days. Teams entered the submarine again and again, trying to find a logical pattern. They inspected the hull. They measured the fractures. They tested pressure values. They studied the electrical circuits. Nothing added up. Every discovery raised new questions. Why did the submarine rise at the exact tide window that allowed search teams to spot it? Why did the crew survive despite systems showing zero oxygen circulation for several minutes? Why were the engines aligned as if someone had corrected their angle during ascent? Why were the battery cells warm as if recently used even though the logs showed no electrical draw during the crucial hours? Rumors started spreading in the base. Some called U-57 a stubborn boat touched by fate. Others said the sea had rejected it. A few whispered stories claiming that the spirits of lost sailors guided it. More than one man refused to serve on the boat if reassigned. They said the submarine had a mind of its own, and minds born in darkness cannot be trusted. Senior commanders wanted to bury the story, but they could not deny the truth. U-57 had died in the water. Yet it returned alive. This was the first resurrection, and the ocean was not finished with it. The second mission of U-57 began under a sky covered in a thick gray sheet of clouds. The sea rolled gently as if waiting for something. The crew still felt uneasy after the impossible return from death. No one spoke of it openly, yet every man carried the same silent question. What had lifted them from the ocean floor when all hope was gone? The captain tried to maintain discipline. He told them that the boat was strong and the mission was routine, but even he could not shake the feeling that something unseen had moved with them on that night of their first survival. They sailed north into waters patrolled by British destroyers. The tension grew with each passing hour. Sonar pings echoed at random moments. Strange signals flickered in the control room. At times, the lights dimmed for a second, then returned without explanation. The crew exchanged worried glances but followed orders. They trusted their training. They trusted their captain. What they did not trust was the eerie silence that seemed to follow their submarine through the deep. Before dawn on the third day, the incident happened. It was sudden, brutal, and without warning. The sonar officer shouted a single word. "Contact!" The captain rushed forward. A British destroyer had appeared directly ahead, moving at full speed. No one understood how it had closed the distance without detection. The crew scrambled to dive, but the ocean betrayed them. The depth under the keel was too shallow. The destroyer bore down on them like a steel beast, driven by fate itself. The impact struck the submarine with the force of a giant hammer. The destroyer tore across the upper hull of U-57, ripping open the outer plates. The sound was deafening. Steel screamed like a living creature. Men were thrown across the control room. Lights burst and glass shattered. The conning tower bent under the crushing weight. Water sprayed inside as valves snapped. Engines cut out. For a moment it felt as though the entire submarine had lifted from the sea, then smashed back down. On the destroyer, sailors shouted that the submarine was gone. They saw it disappear under the waves with no movement, no rise of air, no sign of life. They filed their report with certainty. Target destroyed. No vessel could survive such a collision. The sea claimed its victim again. Or so they believed. Inside U-57, everything was dark. Men lay on the floor, stunned. Some were bleeding. Some gasped for breath. The captain could barely stand. He felt ribs pressing with pain. Emergency. Lamps flickered weakly. The submarine was sinking and the crew knew it. There was no chance to repair the engines. The battery levels dropped rapidly. The hull groaned as pressure increased. Water dripped through cracks. The cold grip of the sea pressed harder and harder. For long minutes, the crew fought helplessly. Then the air turned still. A strange calm took hold of the submarine. The lights stopped flickering. The groaning of the hull softened. Every sound faded. The crew felt as if the ocean around them had grown warm and heavy like a blanket. Men looked at each other with fear because this feeling was not natural. The captain tried to speak, but his voice failed. Darkness washed over them again, just as it had during the torpedo blast. Time passed, though no one could guess how long. When consciousness returned, the crew sensed weightlessness. The submarine was rising, not drifting, rising. The change in pressure told them that the boat was moving upward in a steady, controlled motion. Yet no one was touching the controls. No one had ordered the ascent. Instruments showed that the engines were dead. The ballast tanks were not responding. Still, the submarine climbed as if pulled by an unseen force. Moments later, the hull broke the surface. A quiet splash echoed across the early morning water. No searchlight, no patrol ship, no aircraft witnessed it. Only a small fishing boat drifted nearby. The fishermen stared in disbelief as the wounded submarine rose from below like a ghost, returning from the realm of the drowned. The hatches opened on their own. Fresh air rushed inside. Crew members stumbled out, confused and pale. The fishermen watched the scene with fear rather than curiosity. They whispered that no human boat returns after such a blow. Word reached the Naval Command by noon. They could not understand it. U-57 had survived. Again, no working engine, no stable power, heavy structural damage, yet it surfaced perfectly, balanced and upright. The sea had tried to take it twice. Twice it had failed. Men at the base started calling it a haunted vessel. Others said it carried the will of something ancient. The name spread through the ranks, the Unbroken Keel, but the ocean does not allow unfinished stories. U-57 still had one more journey to face, and its final chapter would test the limits of life, death, and the impossible. The return of U-57 after the brutal collision shook the entire Naval Command. Officers from every department gathered in the main hall, where the air felt heavy with disbelief. The second impossible survival had crossed the line between accident and mystery. Some said the boat was lucky. Others said the sea feared it. A few whispered that the dead were guiding it. Yet no one dared speak these words aloud in front of the high command. Still, everyone felt the same truth. Something unnatural surrounded the submarine. The crew was taken to the infirmary for examination. Doctors observed them for hours. Their bodies were bruised and exhausted, yet their vitals stayed steady. Some sailors trembled when they tried to recall the collision. Others stared blankly at the wall as if chasing memories hidden. Behind a curtain of darkness, the captain sat alone on a bed with his hands shaking slightly. He did not look like a man who feared death. He looked like a man who had felt something waiting for him in the deep. Medical reports revealed nothing unusual. No head trauma strong enough to cause long periods of unconsciousness. No blood loss that could explain the blackouts. No oxygen deprivation that matched the duration they claimed to have been out. The doctors wrote the same line, repeatedly. Symptoms do not match the recorded conditions. That phrase spread through the base like a quiet rumor. Meanwhile, engineers crawled inside U-57 with lanterns and notebooks. They inspected every bolt, every seam, every control panel. They expected to find some hidden mechanical secret that could explain the miracle ascent. Instead, they found more contradictions. The engines were dead during the rise, yet the electrical lines showed heat signatures as if something had activated them momentarily. The ballast tanks were unresponsive during manual testing, yet pressure records showed perfect timing in the ascent. The rudder system was physically stuck from the collision, yet the navigation path drawn from the tracking buoys showed a straight, controlled rise. One engineer sat on the steel floor with his hands covering his face. He whispered to his partner that the submarine behaved like a trained helmsman had guided it, but every helmsman had been unconscious. His partner told him to stop talking like that. Still, both men felt the truth. Something had moved inside the dark interior during those silent hours. Something neither of them wanted to imagine. The official inquiry began 3 days after the second return. Senior officers questioned the captain in a closed room. The walls felt too tight. The lamps seemed too bright. They asked him what he remembered. He said he felt the destroyer strike the hull. He remembered the metal screaming. He remembered shouting orders. He remembered water spilling from broken pipes. Then he remembered a strange feeling. Not fear, not pain. Something heavy and warm. A presence. Then darkness. No dreams. No sense of drifting. Only a silent void. When they interviewed the crew, each man described the same thing. A heavy warmth before the blackout. A calm feeling where panic should have been. A sense that they were not alone. The officers dismissed these claims as shared trauma, but deep inside, they knew that trauma does not unify memories so perfectly. Outside the inquiry room, sailors gathered in small groups. They spoke softly. They questioned whether U-57 should return to the sea. A few swore they heard footsteps inside the submarine at night when no one was aboard. Others claimed they saw the lights flicker whenever they walked past its shadow. One man said he heard a metallic pulse from inside as if the boat breathed. The dock chief told everyone to stop spreading tales, yet even he avoided walking near U-57 after dark. The higher command considered retiring the submarine, but the war demanded steel and fire. Every vessel mattered. Every crew mattered. They ordered repairs. Welders replaced damaged plates. Electricians rewired broken circuits. Painters covered the scars with dark gray coats. Yet, the boat looked unchanged. It still felt wounded alive, restless. A repaired monster waiting for its next call. When the captain returned to inspect the vessel, his steps slowed as he approached. He placed his hand on the cold exterior. The surface felt warm as if it remembered his touch. He looked at the hatches, the conning tower, the lines along the hull. He whispered a single sentence under his breath. "You should not be here." But the submarine remained still as if listening. That night a storm swept across the harbor. Waves slammed against the pier. Wind roared like an angry beast. Lightning split the sky. Yet inside the storm, U-57 stood firm, unmoving, as if held by unseen chains. Sailors watching from the barracks said something even stranger. They claimed that the lights inside the submarine glowed faintly, even though every cable had been cut off during repairs. The ocean had spared U-57 twice. It had risen from destruction twice. The next mission would determine whether the sea granted life or demanded repayment. And soon the order would arrive. U-57 would sail again. The final journey was approaching, and the deep was waiting. The morning was heavy with fog as U-57 slipped quietly away from the harbor. The crew moved. With practiced precision, yet tension hung over them like a thick curtain. Each man remembered the impossible events of their last two missions. The torpedo that should have ended them and the collision that should have crushed the submarine were still fresh in their minds. No one spoke aloud about survival. To do so was to tempt fate, yet every man felt it. Something had watched them. Something had guided them. Something waited below. The waters ahead were darker than usual. Sunlight barely penetrated the waves. Sonar operators reported nothing but static. Even the ocean currents felt strange, as if the sea itself had shifted. The captain tightened his grip on the wheel. Every decision weighed more than life itself. Every order carried the echo of the past. The men obeyed silently, aware that survival in the deep depended on focus and instinct. One mistake could drag them into darkness where no one would find them. Hours passed in tense silence. The crew maintained the course with unbroken discipline. Engineers checked the engines repeatedly. Sensors reported pressure levels and ballast states. Everything appeared functional, yet the men could not shake the feeling that the submarine moved on its own at times. During brief moments when no one was in the control room, the vessel seemed to shift slightly, as if guided by invisible hands. The sensation was subtle but unmistakable. Some whispered that the submarine still remembered the Atlantic's call. Some prayed that it did not. Suddenly, the sonar operator froze. A massive shadow appeared on the screen. Its movement was slow, deliberate, unnatural. The captain leaned forward and studied the readings. The shadow was larger than any ship or known submarine in the area. The crew held their breath. They knew the ocean hid monsters, but nothing this precise. The shadow followed them without approaching aggressively. It seemed curious, patient, silent. The submarine and the shadow moved together in a strange dance. No one dared speak. Hours turned into tension-filled eternity. The crew monitored the shadow constantly. Their focus never wavered. Meals went cold. Watches passed in silence. Every man understood the fragile boundary between life and death in the deep. When night fell, the shadow disappeared. The new crew exhaled slowly. They did not celebrate. Survival had become routine. Routine had become ritual. And yet the Atlantic still held secrets. The submarine had been spared twice, but there was no guarantee for the third time. Every wave could hide death. Every depth could hide fate. The submarine rested in quiet waters near the patrol zone. The crew moved carefully through the narrow corridors. Every man was aware of the strange events that had followed them on previous missions. No one spoke much. Silence had become part of life aboard U-57. The hum of the engines and the occasional creak of steel filled the empty spaces. Each sound reminded them that the ocean was patient but never forgiving. The captain walked slowly through the control room. His hands traced the edges of instruments that had saved and condemned them. He paused at the sonar screen and studied it for a long time. He felt the presence of something he could not name. The Atlantic had a way of reminding him that the rules of life did not always apply in the depths. The men prepared for the next patrol with precision. They checked torpedoes and hatches and ballast tanks. They ran drills silently. Every action felt ritualistic. The memory of the torpedo blast and the collision lingered in their minds. Every wave outside the hull seemed louder than it should have been. Every shadow under the water appeared as if it were alive. The crew could not explain it, and they did not try. They only obeyed. Obedience had kept them alive. Obedience had returned them from death twice, and they knew the ocean was still testing them. Night fell, and the submarine floated under a moonless sky. The water reflected no light. Darkness surrounded them completely. The captain stood alone in the conning tower and looked at the black waves. A cold breeze seeped through the small openings. He felt the weight of everything they had survived. He felt the memory of the shadow that had followed them. during the last patrol. He felt the sense that something unseen was waiting for them. The ocean had spared them twice, but the third time would be different. He did not know how, but he could feel it. The crew ate little and slept less. The tension was like an invisible weight pressing on everyone. No one laughed. No one joked. Even small mistakes were noticed immediately. The submarine seemed alive to them. Every vibration, every groan of metal sounded intentional. It was as if the hull remembered everything. It remembered the blasts. It remembered the collisions. It remembered the hours spent in total darkness. The men whispered quietly to each other about the strange sensations and the impossible events. Some swore they could hear the sound of the ocean moving beneath the submarine like it was breathing. Others claimed that the ballast tanks sometimes shifted slightly when no one touched them. The captain heard these whispers and nodded silently. He did not dismiss them. He understood that the Atlantic had its own logic. As dawn approached, the horizon glowed faintly. The submarine remained still. The crew watched the first light break across the water. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful. The calm before the storm. The captain gave a silent order to begin patrol. Engines hummed softly. The submarine moved slowly into the unknown. The crew followed every command perfectly. Their minds were alert, their bodies ready. They understood that survival depended not only on skill but on understanding the ocean and its mysteries. U-57 was alive, the crew was alive, and they were about to face the next challenge. The storm was coming, and they would have to confront it together or be claimed by the depths forever. The Atlantic stretched endlessly around U-57 as the submarine moved cautiously into uncharted waters. Every man on board felt the weight of the past missions. The memory of torpedoes, collisions, and impossible survivals clung to them like a shadow. Silence had become normal on the submarine, but this silence carried a presence. The men did not speak of it, but they could feel it in the vibrations of the hull, in the shifting pressure of the water outside, in the faint hum that seemed to rise from below the keel. Every instinct whispered that something unknown followed them. The captain stood at the control room window, staring into the darkness. His eyes searched for movement that did not exist. Instruments reported nothing, yet the feeling persisted. The sonar operator tapped the screen nervously. He could not explain the irregular readings. Echoes bounced back that made no sense. Something was there, but it could not be identified. The men held their breath. Every creak of metal sounded louder than it should. Every flicker of light from a monitor seemed a signal. The crew knew that the ocean could hide anything and that what they could not see often mattered most. Hours passed with tension growing steadily. Watches rotated silently. Each man performed his duties with precise care. Meals were taken in silence. Sleep was short and uneasy. Submarines seemed aware of every action. When someone moved, the hull shifted subtly. When someone whispered, the air tightened. No one questioned it. They simply accepted that survival depended on focus and respect for the vessel. The submarine had carried them back from death twice, and the crew understood that respect could mean life or death. Suddenly, the sonar operator froze. An enormous shadow appeared under the hull. It moved, slowly and deliberately. It was larger than any known ship or submarine. The captain leaned forward and studied the readings. The shadow followed their path at a distance. It did not attack. It did not retreat. It observed. The men could not identify it and dared not speculate. They only watched as the massive presence moved silently beneath them. It felt ancient, patient, and deliberate. The submarine seemed to acknowledge it as it glided over the shadow. The men felt the tension in their bones and the weight of something far greater than themselves. The sea had introduced them to a power beyond war and beyond human understanding. The hours stretched like an eternity as U-57 continued its patrol. The shadow remained beneath them as if guiding their path. The crew never left the control room. Eyes never left the screens. Every sound was noted, every movement recorded. They had learned that the ocean tested those who dared to enter it, and that the submarine itself had become part of the test. The men understood that they were observers and participants at the same time. The vessel had a mind of its own. Yet it required them to act with precision and courage. The impossible had become routine. Night fell. The shadow remained. The crew felt its presence more keenly in darkness. The hum of the engines and the creaking of steel seemed amplified. Some whispered quietly about the miracles that had allowed them to survive twice. Others kept silent and focused. The captain walked among them, reminding them to stay calm. Every man understood that fear could be deadly. The ocean waited patiently. It had tests to offer and challenges to impose. U-57 moved slowly through the black water, its crew alert and tense. Shadows in the deep followed them like silent guardians or silent judges. No one could say which. They only knew that the next hours would reveal more secrets of the sea and of the vessel they served. The submarine moved silently through waters colder than any the crew had experienced before. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, and the darkness pressed against every window and hatch. Every man aboard felt a tension deeper than fear. They remembered the impossible returns, the torpedo and the collision. They remembered the way the ocean had spared them twice when it should have claimed them. Now the sea whispered again in a language they could not understand. Every vibration beneath the hull felt deliberate, every sound magnified and strange. The men worked in silence. No one spoke of the past openly, yet everyone carried the memory, like a shadow that stretched across the corridors. The captain walked slowly along the control room, scanning every instrument. The sonar operator stared at the screen without blinking. Anomalies appeared and vanished as if something massive moved with them, yet never revealed itself. The crew followed routine drills, but their movements were careful, precise, aware. Every action mattered because they knew the Atlantic did not forgive mistakes. Even a small misstep could awaken the power that followed them or summon the darkness that had already tried to take them. The submarine seemed alive to them. Its steel and valves seemed to pulse with an intelligence they could not name. The men accepted it without question. Hours passed as tension grew. Every shadow on the instruments became a cause for concern. Every flicker of light or sound made hearts pound. The crew maintained focus. They monitored. Depth levels checked ballast tanks and scanned the waters ahead. The sea seemed calm, but calmness carried its own threat. They knew the currents could hide giants and that pressures beneath the keel could crush them without warning. Some men whispered quietly about the ghostly shadow from the previous mission. Some prayed silently. Some stared at the metal walls, as if trying to read the history etched into every rivet and seam. The submarine had carried them back from death, and they knew the vessel remembered everything. Suddenly, the sonar operator froze. The same massive shadow returned beneath the hull. It moved slowly, deliberate and patient. It did not touch them. It did not attack. It seemed to guide the vessel with invisible hands. The captain studied the readings. Every course correction the submarine made aligned perfectly with the movements of the shadow. The crew felt the weight of something ancient and powerful. The Atlantic was no longer just water. It was a force, observing, testing, judging. The men were observers in its trial. They could not turn back. They could not escape. They only continued forward. The vessel moved as if guided by the sea itself. Night fell and darkness pressed harder. The lights inside the submarine cast long reflections on the walls. The crew felt the presence of the shadow more strongly. Every sound became meaningful. Every vibration seemed purposeful. The captain walked among them, reminding everyone to focus, to obey, to move as one. The men understood that obedience had saved them twice. The ocean had spared them twice. They could not presume a third time would be easy. Every wave seemed alive. Every pressure change seemed deliberate. The submarine glided through the haunting currents, and the men followed every order with precision and care. They had been tested already. The Atlantic would test them again, and U-57 carried them into the unknown with eyes that had seen miracles and hearts that had felt death. The submarine moved slowly into waters that felt older than time itself. Every man aboard sensed that the ocean had remembered every moment of their previous missions. The torpedo, the collision, and the shadow beneath the hull haunted them like invisible chains. No one spoke of it, but the weight of history pressed on every shoulder. The crew kept their eyes on the instruments, their hands on the valves, their minds alert. The Atlantic had spared them twice, but it was patient and it never forgot. Every wave, every current carried memory. Every depth carried judgment. The captain stood at the control room window, staring at the dark waters. He felt the pressure, not just outside, but deep inside his chest. The sonar operator watched the screens intently. Every echo was noted, every pattern analyzed. Nothing moved visibly, but the readings suggested the presence of massive unseen forces. The crew understood that the submarine was a small vessel in a vast theater of power. They understood that the ocean did not act randomly. Its actions were deliberate, patient, exact. They had survived 2 miracles, and now they sailed into the judgment of the deep. Hours passed with tension building steadily. Watches rotated silently. No one laughed. No one spoke unnecessarily. Every movement was deliberate, every command executed without hesitation. The submarine itself seemed aware of the invisible observer that followed beneath it. Every vibration of the steel hull carried meaning. Every creak sounded as if it were sentient. The men felt as though they were being measured. Every breath seemed counted. Every heartbeat recorded. Obedience and focus were no longer choices. They were the only way to endure the trial. Suddenly, the sonar operator shouted. A massive shadow appeared again beneath the keel. It moved slowly, yet purposefully. It followed the path of the submarine, as if judging every course, adjustment, every decision made by the crew. The captain leaned forward, studying the readings. He could not identify it, but he understood its presence. It was older than any map, older than any vessel, older than the men who sailed beneath it. The shadow did not attack. It did not retreat. It simply observed and guided. The crew understood instinctively that they were participants in a test they could not comprehend fully. Night fell, and the Atlantic became absolute darkness. The crew felt the weight of it pressing against the hull. Every sound, every vibration became magnified. The men whispered quietly, only to themselves. Some remembered the impossible ascent after the torpedo. Some remembered the collision that should have ended everything. Every man knew that survival had been granted twice, but the ocean's judgment could not be taken lightly. They understood that miracles were not guarantees. They were lessons and warnings. The submarine glided forward, guided silently by its own mechanisms and perhaps by forces the men could not see. Every eye remained fixed on the screens, every hand ready at the controls. The captain walked among the crew, reminding them to obey, to move precisely, to follow instinct and training. The Atlantic watched patiently. The shadow below seemed to approve, or at least allow the passage. Time felt distorted. Hours felt like days. The crew understood that survival depended on awareness and unity more than any weapon or strategy. As dawn approached, the first faint light reflected off the water. The shadow vanished slowly, as if retreating into the depths from which it had come. The submarine floated on a calm sea. The crew exhaled silently but did not celebrate. They had been tested by forces beyond comprehension. They had faced judgment and survived. The Atlantic had spared them twice and allowed them a glimpse of its depth once more. U-57 continued its patrol, silently moving forward into waters that held even greater unknowns. The men understood that their story was far from over. The ocean had granted them life, but it demanded vigilance and respect. The journey continued. The submarine moved steadily through waters darker than anything the crew had encountered before. Every man aboard felt the weight of past missions. The memory of the torpedo, the collision, and the shadow beneath the hull lingered in every corner of the vessel. Silence had become a companion. It pressed on the men with a quiet intensity. No one spoke except when necessary. Every step, every glance, every movement was measured and deliberate. The Atlantic was patient. It watched, it remembered, it judged. The captain stood in the control room observing the instruments. The sonar operator sat tense, eyes glued to the screen. Echoes bounced back that made no sense. Movements appeared beneath the hull that could not be explained by currents or vessels known to the Navy. The crew understood instinctively that something unknown followed them. It did not attack. It did not retreat. It moved with precision and purpose. The submarine adjusted slightly as if recognizing the presence below. The men felt both fear and awe. They had seen the impossible twice before. Now they were witnessing it in silence. Hours passed with every watch rotation carrying the same intensity. The crew monitored depth and pressure. They checked ballast and engines. Every task was performed perfectly. The WWII submarine itself seemed alive. Every vibration seemed deliberate. Every creak carried meaning. The men understood that their survival depended not on luck or skill alone, but on their ability to move as one with the vessel. Disobedience or hesitation could have consequences far beyond what any man could imagine. Suddenly, the sonar operator froze. An enormous shadow appeared under the hull. It moved, slowly and deliberately. It was larger than any known ship or submarine. The captain leaned forward and studied the readings. The shadow followed their path at a distance. It did not attack. It did not retreat. It observed. The men could not identify it and dared not speculate. They only watched as the massive presence moved silently beneath them. It felt ancient, patient, and deliberate. The submarine seemed to acknowledge it as it glided over the shadow. The men felt the tension in their bones and the weight of something far greater than themselves. The sea had introduced them to a power beyond war and beyond human understanding. The hours stretched like an eternity as U-57 continued its patrol. The shadow remained beneath them as if guiding their path. The crew never left the control room. Eyes never left the screens. Every sound was noted, every movement recorded. They had learned that the ocean tested those who dared to enter it, and that the submarine itself had become part of the test. The men understood that they were observers and participants at the same time. The vessel had a mind of its own, yet it required them to act with precision and courage. The impossible had become routine. Night fell. The shadow remained. The crew felt its presence more keenly in darkness. The hum of the engines and the creaking of steel seemed amplified. Some whispered quietly about the miracles that had allowed them to survive twice. Others kept silent and focused. The captain walked among them, reminding them to stay calm. Every man understood that fear could be deadly. The ocean waited patiently. It had tests to offer and challenges to impose. U-57 moved slowly through the black water, its crew alert and tense. Shadows in the deep followed them like silent guardians or silent judges. No one could say which. They only knew that the next hours would reveal more secrets of the sea and of the vessel they served. The submarine moved silently through waters colder than any the crew had experienced before. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, and the darkness pressed against every window and hatch. Every man aboard felt a tension deeper than fear. They remembered the impossible returns, the torpedo and the collision. They remembered the way the ocean had spared them twice when it should have claimed them. Now the sea whispered again in a language they could not understand. Every vibration beneath the hull felt deliberate, every sound magnified and strange. The men worked in silence. No one spoke of the past openly, yet everyone carried the memory, like a shadow that stretched across the corridors. The captain walked slowly along the control room, scanning every instrument. The sonar operator stared at the screen without blinking. Anomalies appeared and vanished as if something massive moved with them, yet never revealed itself. The crew followed routine drills. Hours passed with tension rising steadily. The crew maintained perfect discipline. Depth levels were monitored, engines checked, ballast systems inspected. Every action was precise, deliberate, aware. The submarine seemed to breathe with the ocean itself. Every creak of steel, every vibration felt like a heartbeat. Men whispered quietly about the miracles that had brought them back from the torpedo and collision. Others stared silently at the walls as if seeking answers in the metal. The submarine carried them through the depths like a living entity. They understood that the ocean had become a judge and they were participants in its trial. Suddenly the sonar operator froze. A massive shadow emerged beneath the hull. It moved, slowly, deliberate and immense. The captain leaned forward, studying the readings. The presence beneath them was enormous, yet patient. It followed their path without aggression. It observed every movement of the submarine as if evaluating their worthiness. The men felt the pressure of it in their bones and in the vibration of the hull. The Atlantic was alive in ways that could not be explained. The shadow was older than the vessel, older than the men, older than any memory. It was patient, it was deliberate, and it was unyielding. Night fell. The submarine glided silently under absolute darkness. Lights flickered faintly on the control panels, casting shadows across the crew. Every sound, every movement felt magnified. The men whispered quietly, sharing observations, memories, and fears. They remembered their impossible ascent after the torpedo and the collision that should have ended everything. The submarine seemed to respond to their tension, to their fear, to their discipline. Every valve, every hatch, every gauge moved in harmony with the presence below. The crew understood instinctively that survival depended on obedience, awareness, and unity. As dawn approached, the shadow withdrew slowly, slipping beneath the surface into unknown depths. The submarine floated in calm waters. The crew exhaled silently, aware that they had survived another stage of the trial. The Atlantic remained patient, powerful, and eternal. The lessons had been taught without words. The men understood that the ocean had granted them life, and that vigilance would be required for every moment that followed. U-57 continued its patrol, moving slowly, steadily, forward into unknown waters where only focus, courage, and unity would allow them to endure the tests that the deep would impose. The submarine moved into the heart of the Atlantic. The water pressed against the hull with a heavy weight. The crew felt every vibration, every creak of metal, as if the vessel itself were alive. Memories of the torpedo and the collision haunted them like shadows that could not be shaken. Silence had become normal, but it carried a presence. The captain stood at the control room window watching the black water. The sonar operator studied the screen with tense eyes. Shadows appeared beneath the hull, massive and deliberate. The crew understood instinctively that the presence was older than the vessel, older than any man aboard, older than any mission. It followed them without aggression, observing, without comment, judging without words. The submarine adjusted subtly, as if acknowledging the shadow. Every man felt the weight of the ocean pressing against their chests. Survival depended on focused discipline and unity. Hours passed as tension built steadily. Every man performed his duties perfectly. Depth was monitored, ballast tanks checked, engines inspected. Every movement precise, deliberate, aware. The submarine seemed to breathe with the ocean. Every sound amplified, every vibration carried meaning. The crew whispered quietly, recalling their impossible ascent after the torpedo and the collision that should have destroyed them. The submarine had carried them through the depths twice already, and now they faced the final test. The ocean waited patiently. Suddenly, the shadow below surged closer. Its movements were deliberate and immense. The sonar readings showed the presence as massive beyond anything recorded before. The captain leaned forward. Every decision mattered. The crew felt the pressure of the shadow in their bones, in the steel around them, in the hum of the engines. The Atlantic had brought them here to face its judgment. The submarine moved smoothly, guided by the unseen forces and the disciplined hands of the crew. They were participants in a trial older than any war, older than any vessel. Night fell. The Atlantic became absolute darkness. Lights flickered faintly, casting long shadows. Across the control room, every sound, every vibration seemed magnified. The men whispered, quietly sharing observations and fears. They remembered the torpedo and the collision and the shadow that had followed them on previous missions. The submarine responded to their tension and attention. Every gauge, every valve, every hatch moved in harmony with the presence below. The crew understood instinctively that obedience, awareness, and unity were the only ways to survive. The shadow remained beneath them, as if testing patience and skill. The captain walked among the crew, reminding them to act carefully, to move precisely, to trust the vessel in the ocean. The men felt awe, fear, and focus all at once. The Atlantic was vast, powerful, and eternal. The Siwa submarine glided through the water, guided by mechanisms seen and unseen, by courage, skill, and instinct. The shadow did not strike. It observed. It allowed the vessel to rise through its trial. As dawn approached, the horizon glowed faintly. The shadow withdrew slowly, slipping beneath the depths into the unknown. The submarine floated in calm water. The crew exhaled silently, aware that they had passed the final stage of the trial. The Atlantic had tested them and spared them once more. U-57 continued its patrol, moving steadily forward, its crew alert, ready, and aware that the ocean had granted them life and demanded vigilance. The journey continued into the unknown, where focus, courage, and unity would always determine survival. The ocean had passed judgment, and the submarine had endured.